Today's guest needs no introduction. You all know Dave Borges. You've been following him. We're here to talk some UConn, and we're here to talk his new book, Hurley's Heroes, which had a chance to dive in and read it and really enjoyed. So, Dave, excited to have you on. Excited to chat all things UConn basketball tonight.
Good to be here, Jared.
So let's just start with this one. Really the 30,000 foot question. What got you interested in putting this book together, and especially at this point in time?
Well, UConn won its second straight national title a couple years ago, and um, last year they embarked on a chance to three-peat, which they would have been only the second program ever to do that, first since UCLA in the early 70s. And I figured it would be a great idea to kind of chronicle that whole year. And certainly, if it ended up in a third straight title, you'd have some history there. But even if it didn't, it would be a pretty interesting story along the way. It always is. I mean, they keep things interesting. Dan Hurley always keeps things interesting and entertaining. So, but somewhere along the line, the publisher decided, let's just do something more on the Hurley years at UConn and how he's turned the program around, and I kind of the gist of it is the two championship years and then last season. That's probably more than half the book, those 3 years. But I did a little bit of everything from the time he first got here and up until last year's very crazy, exhausting season. And there's a lot of good material there. It almost writes itself in some instances.
Definitely. And it's a good, I know you mentioned how the book really focuses on the championship years and last year, but it's a really good look back memory lane for anyone looking to kind of think back on what this Hurley era has been like so far. And one memory I'd certainly put out of my memory, or one game I'd put out of my memory that you kind of kick off the book with is a leaky Gamble in St. Joe's coming into Gamble. How did you end up coming up with the St. Joe's game to really kind of kick things off here?
I just think I think the obvious thing, like a lot of people would have started off with the famous Villanova press
Yeah.
conference. It's coming, and certainly that could have been a good starting off point, because that kind of was the beginning of sort of the new their era dominance. It would come. It was still a couple of years away, but it was sort of the announcement that here we come. But I just think that was year two. Year one was bad. Year two, we expected things to be better, and then in the second game of that season, they lose to a really bad St. Joe's team. The team that ended up, I think, with just 6 or 7 wins all season. And it was. And then, of course, behind that was the fact that the roof was leaking early in the day. Hurley didn't even want to play the game. They were thinking of canceling it, postponing it, even rescheduling it, moving it to a different arena. I don't know where that would have been, but and it was just kind of, to me, it kind of summed up almost the state of the program, and things were still not great. There was problems with the facilities. There were a problem with the team. They just weren't winning yet. And James Bouknight wasn't even playing in that game because he was suspended for his on-campus incident. So to me, that kind of encapsulated everything that was kind of going bad with the program. But that was kind of a jumping point, because after that, the next game they beat Florida at home. They had a pretty good performance out in Charleston, and they had a much better season that ended well until, of course, COVID wiped it all out. But they went into that AAC tournament clearly thinking they had a shot to win it and earn the automatic NCAA tournament bid.
Yeah, it seems like, and I know you bring it up, it's kind of Coach Hurley's process for rebuilding a team. And it goes like, here are the expectations, year one, year two, year three, year four, and so on. And it seems like it played out basically to the plan that he had in mind. Is that how you saw it, Matt? That it ended up matching up kind of to exactly how he expected things to go?
Yeah, it's incredible. In fact, you could argue that it actually was a little bit early. I think his kind of plan, and again, these blueprints, there's room for things to change because of injuries or incidents or COVID-19 and
Yeah.
things like that. But I think the hope was to kind of be battling for national championships by year 6, and they won their first one in year 5, and they won their second one in year 6. So it's like, but it really did kind of it's amazing how it's kind of gone by and large according to plan, and or you could even say a little bit it accelerated a little earlier than even he anticipated.
One thing that stuck with me from the early part, and I obviously remembered at the time, but I think it's kind of faded from my mind a little bit, is you see these coaching changes happen now, and the roster almost looks completely different than when the new coach came in. Coach Hurley seemed to not run anybody off this team. He's stuck with the group he had. Why do you think he did that, and how important do you think that was for the future of what he was trying to build here?
I think it was important. I loved it. I hate when coaches come in and or even when they don't come in, when they have a bad year and they just start kicking people,
Yeah.
not retaining people, not honoring their scholarships for the next year. It happens a lot. It has happened a lot. It's almost a little different now with the portal, but um, I've never liked that, and I think Dan understood that. Why come in and make all these wholesale changes? And the other thing too, of course, is that there was no way he was going to rebuild it overnight anyway. You couldn't do that without the portal at the time, so or without NIL. So he knew it was going to be a process. Don't come in, make these wholesale changes. Upset some people, maybe upset players. It could hurt. It could hurt the reputation on the recruiting trail that he was just coming in and changing everything. So I think it was a good thing in a lot of ways, but it also was a smart thing because it just showed that A, it was going to be a process, and B, that he wasn't here to just shake everything up right off the bat. It was going to take a while, and he didn't want to come across as someone who just was going to boot people out of the program left and right because he didn't like them as players.
Yeah. When he takes this job, and I know you've been following the team forever, obviously he's mentioned it a bunch of times. He's written about it in his book, his experience, especially going to talk to Coach Calhoun about what he inherited and not realizing how bad it was. From your point of view, being around the team, right before he took over, then when he did take over, really how low of a point was UConn basketball at from what you're kind of accustomed to seeing?
It's bad. By the way, I didn't realize he did a book too. I wasn't aware of that. Uh, but yeah, no, he. I remember, we would get kind of hints and messages from people around the program that it's even worse than you think that they're letting on that they're showing. The academics were in shambles. I know that even the Worth Family Champion Center, even though it was relatively new, was not really being kept up well. The weight room wasn't great. The facilities weren't in incredibly great shape, and that's a little bit of nitpicking because it still was a pretty good on-campus facility. But yeah, it was a mess. And then of course even the players there, you got, and I hate to name guys by name, but Quentin Williams was a guy who probably never should have never been a Division I player, but he was essentially recruited off of a YouTube video. So you had that kind of stuff going on. The program had been kind of um, abandoned in a lot of ways by the staff at the time, and it was a real big mess. And they wanted us to know that a little bit off the record stuff, but they definitely let it be known that there was a real mess that they had in their hands, and they cleaned it up pretty quickly, though.
Oh, definitely. As you go about, rebuilding this program, obviously, the coaching can try to do all that they can do, but it ultimately comes down to the players. If you had to say a guy or two who maybe gets a little bit kind of flies under the radar as a guy that really helped propel this program to the next level, is there a player or two you think that you'd put as kind of the more underrated guys of this Hurley era?
I think you like to look at a guy like Isaiah Whaley. Um, he's almost not even underrated anymore because Dan Hurley has just exalted him as someone who really epitomizes the turnaround of the program, and it's true. Although I do think it's interesting because he didn't play at all in Hurley's first year, and he was up kind of the end of the bench, and it didn't seem like Hurley really jibed with him as far as what he brought to the table. And it took a while it took some injuries, and it took a while, I think, for Dan to realize what a valuable piece he was, even though he wasn't a great shooter. He didn't do anything particularly great, but he just played damn hard. He rebounded, and he was a team guy, and he was a glue guy, and all those cliches. And he ended up being one of the most beloved players. So there's a guy. A lot of those guys, like your R.J. Coles, your Tyrese Martins, who's in the NBA now. I think Dan's just as proud as the fact that a kid who was like a three-star recruit at best to Rhode Island for him, came over to UConn with him, ended up being a second-round draft pick, and is now as a multi-year NBA player. So those kind of things, yeah, certainly the coaching staff has been great. I think they get a lot of love, but they certainly all could be head coaches by now, and they've stuck around. And obviously, Kamani Young, Luke Murray, Tom Moore is now a general manager, but he's obviously been around the program forever. So there's a lot of different people like that. But I think those players who didn't win a championship but kind of set the tone, I think those guys a little bit under the radar.
Yeah. As you kind of go through this, and you go through year by year talking about the different games, I know we just talked about the players here, but was there a defining game or two that you would say, really got this program back where you start thinking about taking UConn basketball a little bit more seriously and putting them in line with previous UConn basketball teams?
Yeah, that's a good question because, I think a lot of people would point to sort of when they beat Houston their final uh, regular
Home
season home
game, yeah.
game in 2020, shortly before the pandemic. But I think there was a very good Houston team. I don't know if it was a great Houston. They were ranked, and it was a home game. I think you look at maybe it's weird. It's like there's some obvious choices, but in the Villanova game, even though they lost it, that's kind of that proved that they were finally be able to battle against Villanova on the road. This team that had dominated the Big East in UConn's absence and still was the dominant team and had won 2 titles. So that's a good example. But there were some games that maybe almost get lost in the shuffle. There was a road game. They even when they started to win a little bit, they were still not beating good teams on the road. They got a road win against Marquette in 2021, I believe. And I think Sonogo was injured, didn't play much, but they went out there and got a win, a really gutsy performance. So things like that. I think when they start, to me, it's all about winning those tough road games, those tough neutral site games. So I think when they started winning those type of games is when you knew that this was happening.
Basketball season's back, and just like our favorite team, Martin Rosals knows the value of tradition, quality, and consistency. Since 1928, Rosals has been Connecticut's go-to for hot dogs, kielbasa, and sausages, made fresh, never frozen, using the same original family recipes that have built a lasting legacy. So before tip-off, make sure your grill lineup is ready. Look for Martin Rosals at your local grocery store or visit their retail store in New Britain to stock up for game day. Is there a game that, as you go back and you're working on this book, that just kind of sticks out to you as like, hey, not necessarily the most important game or a defining game, but just kind of a fun game that, brought you back a good memory looking back on it as you're putting this book together? Because I know there's one in particular from my end that I loved reading about again, but I'll let you go first here.
Yeah, again, um, you know, well, which one are you talking about? Because maybe you jogged my memory a little bit.
All right, I'm gonna say my favorite, it's just a random game, but it was just, I think it epitomizes everything. Was the double ejection with Hurley and Frank Haith
Oh yeah,
in Tulsa.
yeah.
That was a fun one to read about again because I always anytime I'm bored or want to go look at a funny clip on YouTube, I always go and search that one out.
Well, yeah, the thing about that to me is that it shows how stark things were at the time when you're
Yeah.
playing a conference game in the middle of January in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Nothing against Tulsa. It's actually not a bad town, but it's not the place really you want to be in mid-January at an arena that was half full. Like 4,000 people. And here you have Hurley and Haith getting ejected. For both, neither team were particularly good. I mean, it's just such a stark contrast to where UConn would be in a few years. And of course, the another one, and then, if we stay on the Hurley ejection theme, is of course the Villanova game where they finally broke through and beat Villanova in Hartford
Yeah.
in 2022. And of course, the funny thing about that is that Dan wasn't around for that one, for the end, because he was ejected and Kamani Young took over as the head coach, and they ended up winning a real a classic game down the stretch against Villanova. So. And it's kind of weird because, like I said, they finally beat the Villanova
Yeah.
Hex, and Dan wasn't even the head coach for more than half the game. So things like that sort of are just crazy. But yeah, those are the kind of games that you're right. You kind of when I was researching and thinking back to those games, of course I covered them, so it wasn't so much research; it was just kind of jogging the old memory.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that almost stick out more because everyone knows about the national championships and Final Fours and things like that.
Exactly. I think those are the easy games to go to. You remember those, but as you're reading this book and you kind of get to think about some of those bumps and bruises along the way in the journey to getting UConn basketball back to where it is now, I really enjoyed getting to look back at those ones. One thing that I found interesting you write about in the book, and you were open about it, is kind of the dynamic between being a beat writer and covering the coach, where sometimes you guys haven't always agreed on things. Things have kind of come out and been back and forth. Take me through just what it's like being a beat writer in today's day and age, in your role in covering the team.
I think it's just a very delicate balance. You have to respect how difficult the job it is that they have, how much pressure they have. Dan Hurley has on him, and certainly had at the beginning of his tenure when he wasn't winning at first, and then he was getting bounced from the first round of the tournament. So um, with social media, there's so much criticism out there, and obviously there was a lot of criticism the past couple of years with some of the ejections or sideline antics and things like that. From my end, it's a delicate. You have to, but I just insist. I can't, and I'm not trying to like brag or anything, but I can't be a reporter without being as fair as I can both ways. And I don't know that I've ever, other than maybe once or twice, criticized a kind of in-game strategic move that they've made because he's out there with an excellent staff. He has to make these decisions on the fly. He knows more. I mean, I feel like I know basketball, but he obviously knows more about basketball than he's forgotten more than I've ever known. So, and he was a very high level player, things like that. So, you have to balance it where you need to stay on their good side in a sense. You have to be fair, but you have to be critical when necessary. And I think the criticisms I've had has been some of the behavior on the sideline. I think at times it's been just over the top. People disagree with me. That's okay. He's disagreed with me, and that's okay. But obviously be fair when they're doing great, and it's quite frankly very difficult to be too critical of a team that wins back-to-back national titles. But obviously there was January of the first year of 2023, and there were the sideline stuff and the interaction with the fans that I think at times he's gone overboard with. So it's a delicate balance. You just have to you want to be able to go to them for information at times, but you also don't want to be a homer. And I've been called both, so I guess that's good, right? I think I get emails all the time, but what a homer I am. But then I get people saying I'm too tough. So I guess you're never going to please everybody. So I guess that's a good thing when you're pissing everybody off.
That's usually a good sign there. As we just kind of wrap talking the book a little bit, I know one of those fun questions out there is, in the sports world particular, is talking like a Mount Rushmore. If you had to, I don't know, make your Mount Rushmore, say, 4 or 5 of the key players in this Hurley era, who are you putting on yours?
Oh, the Hurley era. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you got to put Adama Sanogo up there.
Yeah.
I think you probably have to put Tristan Newton there. I mean, he ends up as one of the most decorated players in the program history. He's in the Huskies of Honor. He won 2 titles. He was Final Four most outstanding player, first team All-American. A guy from 3 years earlier was at ECU, and nobody really knew about him, although Dan did, and he liked him from the time you saw him play against them. So yeah, so I'll go Sonogo and Newton. I think I want to put Donovan Clingan there only because he's a Connecticut kid and
Yeah.
he kind of embodies the local kid does good, and he comes in there, sits as he comes, dutifully comes off the bench as a backup the first year, and then he blossoms as a star and a lottery pick the next year. Those are the three from the more recent. So then I guess I gotta go for a guy who from the early, you could say, um, he's had a spotty NBA in career, but James Bouknight was
That
kind of their first, kind of Hurley's first. Well, he was his first lottery pick, and he was only like a top 50 or 60 type recruit. So even though obviously James had some issues while he was here, and the NBA thing hasn't worked out, I do think that without having thought about this too much beforehand, I wish you had told me about this, but I'll go with those. I don't know. I'll go Bouknight, Sonogo, Clingan, and Tristan, and obviously there's some great players I'm leaving out.
Yeah, no, I think it's a tricky one, and I had Book Night on mine because I think he was one of those first recruits Hurley really brought in that brought a little bit more legitimacy to the program. Like he was the next step up from what they hadn't been bringing back into the program. Comes that first lottery pick in the Hurley era and kind of brings a little bit more of that legitimacy back to things. So I like that pick there. That's the sneaky one I think that you could get up there from the
But he was also proof, though, like, again, that yes, he was a well regarded recruit, but he wasn't a McDonald's All American
no
or anything
no
like
yeah
that. And then there he goes from like a top 50 or top 60 recruit to a top whatever he was 11, 13 pick in the NBA draft. So what he is an example of the development that players can have in Hurley's system, and Tyrese Martin's an example of that, and there's others obviously draft picks or not. So yeah, but yeah, Bouknight I think is a good choice.
yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit just about the current Huskies while I've got you. Just give me your overall thoughts on these first three games they've played so far.
I really came into the season thinking, and here's where I could be labeled a homer again, I suppose, but I really believed that this was going to be a very, very good championship level team, and I still believe that because of their depth. They're basically too deep at every position. They've been without they were without Terrace Reed for the first game and for their two exhibitions. They've been without Braylon Mullins since the first exhibition. Jacob Furphy's out now. I don't know if he's going to be a huge impact player this year, but you know, Reed comes back and he immediately, the competition level wasn't great, but it just showed you how different they are when they have a big dominating inside man they can dump the ball into every couple of times down the floor, and it frees everybody else up, frees the perimeter up, it frees the guards up offensively. Defensively, he's a rim protector. Yeah, you look at the dominant. UMass Lowell is not a good team at all, but how dominant they were in that game. And then you look at the first half against the better team, Columbia, who, hasn't been a great Ivy League team, but they had four starters back, I believe. Their coach
Yeah.
is excellent. The guy who's an assistant coach for Florida who beat UConn last year and won the national title. Ivy League is a relatively competitive conference. So, and the first half the other night was just another spectacular showing. And so that's a long-winded way of me for saying that I think they're just about as good as I expected, maybe be better than a lot of people expected. And once they're fully healthy, and if they can remain healthy, they're they're Final Four caliber without question.
Yeah, I like the way the schedule sets itself up this year, where you get a couple of these bye games before you get into BYU and Arizona coming up. Nice to get some of these bigger games in there earlier in the non-conference too. What are you looking to see out of the team against this tougher competition once they step it up here? With BYU Saturday, Arizona next Wednesday.
If you look at it now, they've got over the next month, they're playing six high caliber, high major teams. Five of them are ranked right now. Texas is just out of the top 25, but they're a good team, well coached, with good old Sean Miller coming back to town. But you look at all those games, all 6 games. Two of them are at Madison Square Garden, which is Stores South, if you will, a place where it's going to be a lot of UConn fans. They've had a lot of success. One's in Boston, which will be likely be a very pro UConn crowd, although AJ DeManza of BYU will certainly have a lot of family and friends there. But so you'd think that'll be a pretty good advantage. 2 of them are home games for UConn, Texas and Arizona. And Arizona is a very, very good team. It's going to be a tough game. And then they go out to Kansas, and in my opinion, I don't think this is a marquee Kansas team. I think they're a top 25 team. I love the freshman Peterson.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong. Maybe they're better, but it's always a very tough place to play. So you can't go out there and expect an easy victory by any stretch, or a victory even. But in fact, they've never beaten Kansas. So all 6 games are winnable, quite winnable, I think. Which doesn't mean they will win all 6. In fact, I can almost guarantee they won't. You got to figure they'll slip up somewhere, because then you go into the Big East, and boy, I mean, it doesn't look like the Big East is terribly, terribly good this year. And other than St. John's, Creighton, a couple of road games,
Yeah, not much.
you're not looking at a hugely competitive Big East season. So that's why it's part of why these 6 games are so big for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you hopping on here in the middle season. I know it's always a busy time when you get a night off and don't have a game. So thanks for hopping on again. Hurley's Heroes, the book. Go pick it up. It's a great read. You're going to really enjoy it. If you're making one of these road trips where maybe you're hopping on the flight to Kansas, it's going to make for a great plane read. So, Dave, appreciate it, and thanks so much for joining me.
All right, Jared. Thanks a lot. Good talking to you as always.